Well, thanks for joining us. Oh, great. We're on recording now. Thanks for joining us tonight, everyone, for our Everyday Gardener series. Tonight is all about feeding birds in the winter. And we have with us Adam Leonberger, and he is the horticulture agent in Franklin County. And he'll be teaching the class tonight. So thanks, Adam. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. First off, we got a special guest with us tonight. We've got Dr. Christine Cassie from the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. She is the state wildlife veterinarian, and she was going to come talk to us a little bit about feeder hygiene, especially in light with the bird sicknesses that we had this past season. Are you able to share screen, I think? Or
yeah,
not?
I'm gonna, it says the host is disabled participating. Share. You can make me a temporary host and then I should be able to share.
Faye, do you have that ability, or is that Jessica?
No, Jessica, if you can make her co-host, that would be great.
I was going to say, I thought I'd be able to, but.
Yeah, I just looked too, and I thought we had that capability as co-host, but it looks like we do not.
Aha. Do this. I'll just put in presenter mode. Full screen? Looks good?
Looks good.
Awesome. Okay, so I was going to talk about some bird feeder care, as Adam said, and kind of in light of diseases and why we're concerned about bird feeder hygiene. So really having healthy backyard birds. I mean, this really does come down to that old saying of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. There are really about two major factors that contribute to disease at bird feeders. And when I say that, I mean, why does it occur? And really that's because they're coming in contact with contaminated surfaces and materials, because you have birds congregating at feeders where they are going to defecate. They can, aerosolize certain pathogens, and then, crusty lesions like pox, the virus particle is actually in the lesion, and that breaks off and then another bird ingests it. So a lot of this has to do with like an oral route or aerosolized route through mainly bodily secretions that contain a pathogen. And I'm going to use the word pathogen a lot. I suppose I could use germ, but generally when I'm talking about a pathogen, I'm talking about either a bacteria, virus, or parasite. And so for the first one, the biggest thing you can do is for that solution is cleaning the feeders regularly to reduce the number of pathogens present. Congregating animals is the second major factor. I mean, obviously, birds are going to be the density is going to be artificially elevated when you're bringing them in and you're supplying them with a food source. And over winter, I mean, they're going to be a little bit more stressed because of dietary restrictions. I mean, if the food is scarce, there's not heat stress, but cold stress. All of that contributes to the overall health of a bird. And then you bring them into areas where there's lots of birds that potentially are harboring pathogens. So really it's the two ideas is one is that you're increasing exposure to pathogens, and then the other one is the increased number of birds is increasing the potential for spread among them. So the solution for congregating animals is really to take down the feeders at the first sign of disease, to reduce that contact between individuals and minimizing disease transmission. So some of the common pathogens of bird feeders, Salmonella is probably a big culprit in winter. We actually had an outbreak in the pine siskins this past year. It started, late December into January. You guys may have heard it. It got some national attention. The CDC had put out like an alert about salmonellosis connected to songbirds and bird feeders. There was one case in Kentucky that was confirmed that was related to salmonellosis or Salmonella typhimurium. So when I put SPP, that's a general, so it's not species specific, because there's many types of Salmonella, just like there's many types of mycoplasma. The mycoplasma most people know is Gallislepticum, which is the one that causes house finch eye disease. So that crusty, swollen conjunctiva And I will say that was definitely, everybody was thinking this unknown bird illness that happened this summer was related to that. And unfortunately, there's just been no evidence to suggest that Mycoplasma gallisepticum played a role in that outbreak. Other common viruses, I mentioned one earlier, avian pox. That's where they get those little wart-like lesions, the crusty bumps. Paramyxoviruses, common, causes like acute mortality. Pigeon paramyxovirus is one that's commonly referred to. Trichomoniasis is caused by basically a protozoa, and it infects the throat, and it can close it up and make it hard for them to swallow. So when the image on the right is just a general graphic to try to give you some ideas of the common ways that diseases are spread. And that fecal oral route is a big one. I mean, at bird feeders, you have them coming, eating the seed, especially where animals are defecating. This was taken from a British Ornithological Society, so that's why it's not spelled the way we would normally spell fecal. How to minimize pathogen transmission, good hygiene practices. And so that's really, feeders need to be cleaned every 2 weeks. And I think a lot of people, or at least a lot of new people to the game, are not aware of the necessity of cleaning. I mean, we clean our dishes whenever we use them once. We clean our pet bowls. If you're not cleaning bird feeders, you have the potential to be spreading pathogens around. And so that should really be done every 2 weeks with a 10% bleach solution. And what that looks like is 1 part bleach mixed in 9 parts of water. And then you want to rinse it really well because you don't want any bleach residue left over, and allow it to air dry. You should also keep, if we're not talking about the feeder, we're talking about the feed. You should try to keep it dry. And so that has to do with, there's fungal pathogens that create toxins when feed gets moldy. So you don't want to be putting out moldy seed. And then regularly removing the expelled feed from the ground. So that's like, the overflow, the birds get a little crazy and there's seed all over the ground. You want to remove that. I mean, that's just another breeding ground for pathogens. It's a common way salmonella can get spread. And then there's definitely precautions for you as well. Salmonellosis or salmonella is zoonotic, and humans can get it. Simple things like washing your hands or wearing gloves is a great way to reduce that potential of getting it. But if you're immunocompromised, that puts you at a higher risk, and you should definitely consider having someone else probably take care of the bird feeder, and just avoid that altogether. Enjoy looking at it and see if someone else can clean it for you. So signs of an outbreak. Some of the common clinical signs. So this is getting back to, if you see disease, take it down. They're weak. I say fluffed up. That could be like, the ruffled, poofed up bird. They're very lethargic. They can die acutely. So that just means in a very short period of time. You look out there, the bird is there, and then all of a sudden it's dead. Difficulty flying, swollen, crusty lesions, or seeing multiple dead birds. And so if you're seeing sick or dead birds at feeders or bird baths, just take them down for 2 weeks and clean them with that 10% bleach solution. Avoid handling birds unless it's absolutely necessary. If you do handle them, wear gloves. And keep your pets away from them, including birds, like indoor pet birds, away from sick or dead wild birds. And that's just a good standard precaution. And please contact us if you suspect there's an outbreak going on at your feeder. We're definitely always open. And that's how we found out about the salmonella outbreak that was happening in the winter. It was on some of the news, social media feeds. People have been seeing some dead pine siskins, which is a very susceptible species to salmonella. So it was high on the rule out list. And then it come to find out it was salmonella. So that was really helpful for the public, to reach out and let us know what they were seeing. So if you want to report wildlife diseases or mortality events, 2 main ways to do it. You can call our general line, which is the 1-800 number listed here. Or you can go to our website and look up your regional biologist by county and just give them a call and let them know what you're seeing. If you can collect dead birds, I mean, that's something you coordinate with the biologist because typically they need to be frozen. And then with that, I'll take any questions. And I'm gonna stop sharing unless you guys want to go back to anything. Oh, any questions?
Anybody have any questions?
Like I said, and there was an email on there. It was wildlifehealth@ky.gov. You guys are more than welcome to use that. Send me any messages, questions you may have, and I can get back to you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Casey. That was really great information and really helpful to share. So
Yeah.
thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Yeah, no problem. I was sorry. It was a little short and sweet, but it was,
That's good.
That's
Fine.
perfect.
that was time, and I was I could talk forever about diseases. I don't think you guys want to get bored with that. So
No, it was
right.
super helpful. I didn't realize the cleaning every 2 weeks. So just, I mean, all the information, reminders to people too. So thank you so much.
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Take care.
Alrighty, bye.
Bye. All right, Adam, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, let me figure out, get my right screen up here. As long as I'm going to the right spot. Does that show up right?
Yep, we got full, oh, well, we did have full screen.
Okay, let's see what I did left. There we go. No, there we go. Okay, so I'm talking to you guys a little bit about how to get your garden more attractive to your birds. But this is kind of that prime peak time that I start thinking about putting bird feeders back up. I know for that. But you can always kind of start about thinking about getting those songbirds specifically into your garden, kind of a year-round kind of activity. If you're trying, just as if you're trying to attract any wildlife, there it goes. Kind of have to give it the right habitat, the right environmental conditions that needs. Really, they all need at least, the basic level of things, just the same thing that we need for all of us. They need shelter of some sort, water, and food. That's kind of the core things that they're really looking for. That's going to try to attract them in. So for water, it's pretty simple. Any kind of water features, any of the shallow water features, so bird baths or drippers. Bird baths are a common one. They're typically and they can be something out of a commercial bird bath. They could be more of a homemade version. Really, those just need to be some sort of large shallow basin that the birds can stand in and kind of wash themselves in, drink that water at that point. Any of your self-made ponds, if they're shallow, or if they have any kind of, a lot of times people will incorporate either waterfalls or stream banks into any backyard ponds, or even just the pondless waterfalls, fountains, and stuff like that, that can kind of circulate that water and dribble and get that, serve that as well. As far as the water goes, you just like with the bird feeders, you do want to make sure that you're keeping those clean. Water even more so, just because that's kind of that universal life. One of those things that is almost universal for life is that we need that water, especially in the summer when it gets hot, it gets really warm. Really need to be washing that water out, changing out any shallow bird baths that don't move on every daily or every few days, just to try to get that water clean, fresh water in there. Rinse it out, give it a good scrub. At least weekly, go through back through again with bleach. Just make sure that you're sanitized and get it back through. In the winter, bird baths are a little hard to run in the middle of winter just because they tend to freeze over. But any of the larger moving waters, kind of, if you have any kind of fountains, a lot of times you can get those to run through all but the hardest of winters. That moving water is less likely to freeze. Just kind of like you see if you go hiking in the middle of winter, a lot of times you still see the streams and waters flowing. Might be an ice layer on top, but there's still water flowing because it's water moving, takes longer to freeze. They also make stock tank. If you have a larger thing like ponds or some shallow ones, they make bird bath heaters or stock tank heaters. Essentially, those are just heating up the water just to the point of being above freezing. Those work just as well. These birds, even in winter, the water's not nearly as available, but they still is an important part to have those birds year round. So some sort of water access, if you don't have it naturally nearby on site, then helping provide that locally in your yard will help try and draw this in. As far as shelters go, typically when people think about shelter, they think about nesting sites. Things like bird boxes, bird houses, all can be common practices. I won't get too detailed on the different types, just because every different type of bird are going to have their different requirements for what they want as a nest box. Whether they're more enclosed spaces, open shelves, they're all going to there's different opportunities to have those in there, similar to the feeders, similar to the water baths. Into the season, when they're finished with it, you want to make sure that you are cleaning those out so they can and sanitize them. So that way, especially with the new birds and baby birds going there year in, year out, it's clean for those baby birds. But you don't have to just stick with just bird houses if you want to attract them in, the nesting ones. Like I said before, some birds don't even want to stay in those nesting boxes at all. Hummingbirds, I know for sure, they build their own nest. They use those perennially every year. So if you find a hummingbird nest, leave it there. It'll come back, clean it out, and reuse it on its own. They tend to like kind of a denser canopy, things like maple and box elders and a couple other I'm trying to get off the top of my head. But they like kind of those maples and all that will help try to draw those in. Some of those shorter bush, hedgy kind of plants that gives them kind of some protection from any larger predatory birds. Other things, if you have any reeds or taller, stiffer grasses, that provide some shelter there. Evergreens are good options. If you have a dead tree on your property and you can leave it up, that will also take down the outlying branches that are going to cause continue to break and fall down to the main trunk. We typically call that a snag. If you can leave those tree snags up, that provides a lot of nesting sites for things like for woodpeckers. Once those woodpeckers move on, that provides shelter for other birds and critters like squirrels and owls. So again, just some different ideas as far as how to create some natural shelter on it. If you can start clustering some of your trees and shrubs together, that's going to create more, and especially if you can get some variation in that grouping of plants, that is going to create some nicer, denser material in there, gives them that winter shelter, gives them that protection from predatory birds, give them some height on top of that as well. That gets them off the ground from some of the ground predators. Evergreens can provide a lot of winter protection in there, especially in those cold, hard winter. If we get any of those cold, hard winter storms, all those needles kind of help break up that wind and keeps them from gives them a chance to kind of get out of that, so they can the wind from carrying out the heat. Again, large trees can have those nesting cavities. They can also provide big spots for just to have a roosting site to sleep overnight. If they're not actively nesting, they're not necessarily going back to a nest to sleep throughout the night. They're just finding a nice kind of somewhat sheltered place that they can perch and sleep through the night. Native grasses not only can provide a location for it, but they can also give that natural material to be pulling from and building their nest from as well. And again, the dead snags not only create holes they can have holes for for nesting, but also help provide that food, that natural food. As far as food, a lot of people, when talking about feeding birds in the garden, a lot of people turn straight to doing bird feeders, which is perfectly fine. It's a great option to try to help draw those in. We've got various different types up there. Number one top is hummingbirds. When we're talking about hummingbird feeders, they're really being drawn into the base of it. So ignore the fancy, expensive red hummingbird feeder food. It's expensive sugar is all you're doing. It's sugar and red food coloring. They don't care. Just mix up the sugar solutions. I usually just make up what I need at that point, changing it out every 3 to 4 days, especially in the heat, because we don't want that to start fermenting inside that container and having a bunch of drunk hummingbirds flying around. There are various different styles of actual bird seed kind of holders. You've got the tube feeders up on number 2, more of a hopper style. 3 on number 3, on down the bottom left, there's kind of a more open platform section. We've got a lot of different variety of birds that can get up there onto those materials. Suet feeders, suet's kind of a fat seed mixture a lot of times. And then 6 is kind of finally is that tube, that really small, thin thistle, niger, finch feeder kind of styles. When you're looking at the bird feeders, you really want to make sure that it's suited to the birds that you're trying to attract. Different birds have different requirements. Obviously, if you have a smaller bird feeder stand on it, you're not going to, it's going to be harder for any of the larger species to get onto it. You want to make sure that the actual bird feeder itself is still in sturdy and good standings, no sharp corners, nothing broken. Make sure all the lids and everything fit tight. Like Dr. Casey was saying, you want to keep that bird seed dry so it doesn't start spoiling and start rotting. And again, easy to clean. The tube feeders are really easy. They are a little bit difficult to start getting into and get cleaned out. A long bottle brush is about the best thing I've found for that, is really be able to get down through there and kind of get that dust and that cleaning out of it. As far as the different food types, there are a bunch of different types out there, seed types out there. Probably the easiest thing to kind of get into it, and one of the best ones, if you can only go with one type of bird seed, I would go with the black oil sunflower seeds. I believe it's about 40 different species can feed off that type of food. So you can feed a wide range of different species off of one seed type. There in the center, you got the Niger seed, that's or thistle seeds. These are the seeds of the, I forgot the name now, sorry. It's not the safflower. It's not an actual true thistle seed. It's but it's commonly referred to as thistles because it looks similar to that. These are typically put into smaller, into sacks or fencing or something like that, really more targeting towards finches. So if you really want to make sure that you're drawing more of the goldfinches and other finches in there, this is one of those bird seeds that you can bird seeds and feeder types you can put out there really to target those specific species. Safflowers, that's the bottom one. They look a little bit like small white sunflower seeds. These attract a little bit different type of groups. One of the suggestions is that if you have a lot house sparrows or common gackles, this is not as attractive of a feed to them as the black oil sunflower seed. So changing some of your different seed types can really help you get the kind of target the species. The suet feeders, this is really, especially in the winter, can provide a lot of needed energy. Those fats have a lot of stored energy in it in a small amount. So just for them eating a little bit, they can keep themselves a little bit warmer, burn that fat up right there. There's different types like this. The cages, you have the open cages like this that a lot of different birds can get to. If you're really trying to target some different species, they have styles that are kind of hanging upside down. That'll really get you towards more of the flickers, the sapsuckers, and the woodpeckers, the different species that can actually hang upside down. Not every bird actually has the foot strength to hang upside down, so you won't be able to get like the house bears can't get in there and take it over and all that. The suets, I have a little bit of issues with, especially, I'm again using them typically in the fall and winter. Spring, it gets hot and then they start melting and then it gets mixed. You end up with a puddle of fat, tallow, beef tallow on the ground, which is kind of gross and smelly. The fifth one there on the very right, I mentioned it there. That just looks, that's kind of the standard sheep seed mixes. It's got a lot of different materials in there. There's milo and the millets in there, and very little of other types. These, birds will eat these, but these are typically going to be eaten by things like your mourning doves. All your other species that most people are trying to really track into it, they don't eat it, and they're just going to toss it on the ground. So it might be the cheapest seed, but you're spending most of it most of your money is going on the ground. So, if you're looking to get those kinds of birds, those are the good type. You can put this out there. Most people that I've talked to typically are going to look for different songbirds that are just going to be kind of ground feeders. If you're really trying to get some varied diets in there, that number 6 kind of grosses some people out. Those are dried mealworms. Give them a little bit more protein throughout the season, which is really good, especially in the spring when they're trying to look to feed the young at that point. So again, a little bit more targeted. Number 7 there in the middle. That's kind of an Oriole feeder. they're not very common here in Kentucky, but they do occasionally come through. I know I saw, I think this is the most I've seen this spring. I think I saw 5 or 6 this spring coming and getting nested materials. So this says here, the common thing you always see, often referred to as showing people putting up half an orange up there for them to eat. They also eat grape jelly. So this is kind of a bit more of a jelly feeder. That's what's in those little cups in the kind of scattered around. So just kind of getting grape jelly, again, trying to get kind of as clear a few ingredients in that grape jelly as possible, those different types of jellies as possible. That way it's more closer to what they would be looking for. Cracked corn, again, more of your larger birds, your jays and cowbirds are typically going to be going for this. Anything with that cracked corn in there is also going to be very attractive to squirrels. So if you had squirrel problems, I would definitely stay away from this type of bird food. As far as where to place the bird feeders, the 2 things you really want to do is making sure that you can place the feeder where you can see it and where it's in a safe location. Obviously, you want to put, most of the time people are putting out the bird feeders because they also, not only does it feed and help the environment, potentially, help feed these birds that don't have as much native food out there, but also we enjoy looking at them, which is an important part. We're doing the gardening for also, not only for the environment, but also because we enjoy being it and seeing it and observing it. So making sure that you can put it someplace that you can see, where you can look at it from a comfortable location. Also, you want to make sure that you put it in a safe spot. You want to either close to your house or far away from the house. So either within about 3 feet of the house. So when they leave that bird feeder, if something comes along, scares them, they're not able to get to full speed. And if they do hit the house, they're not running into it at full speed. Otherwise, you want to move it out at least 30 feet away. That way, there's enough kind of clearance for them to kind of fly up and around from it. You also want, so that's kind of as from the house perspective. That danger zone between that 3 to 30 feet is kind of that danger zone from having those birds at that point. If you can also provide get it a little closer to a natural shelter. So these are evergreens, low shrubs, any of the taller perennials. This gives them some not only natural shelter, but also spots to kind of take their food and leave. Some birds will sit at the bird feeders and just eat and eat and eat. Other birds want to come and get a seed, and they'll fly off someplace to eat it and then come back and just kind of keep going back and forth. So if you can get those natural shelters, those other plants, those roosting sites nearby it, that will provide that kind of site right there. So I'm trying to remember where my other sites were. When you're looking at these also, when you're looking at where to place it as far as natural shelter, you want to make sure that you are getting it far enough up off the ground, so that way other ground predators can't get it, and provide these natural shelters also so that way if there's hawks or anything coming through, kestrels, they can fly into those and give some better ground cover. Typically we're talking about hanging about 10 feet away from any other structure, any trees, branches. That way it's a little harder for things to kind of jump across to the bird feeders. So with using the only one type of bird feeders, you can definitely do this. You are going to get, it's a good way to start of just kind of using that one type, kind of see what you're getting there. But if you're just using that one type, you're really going to be limited on what kind of birds you're drawing in. So it's really, if you really want to maximize the number of birds you can, looking at a variety of different bird feeders, but are different shapes and feed types will give you the most variety in your bird feeders. If you can, if you're trying to get the most variety of birds, do you really want to minimize how often you let those feeders get empty. They're a little forgiving if it's a day or so two that they're empty. But if that food's not reliable, not a very reliable spot, those birds aren't going to be checking that area on a regular very often. So if you can feed them on a regular basis, they're going to keep coming back on a more regular basis, and more different species are going to find that regular feeding site and start coming there on a regular basis too. Talked a little bit about cheap seed. I don't recommend it just because that it's not the biggest bang for your buck for what kind of species I'm usually looking for, what people tell me that they're looking for, those different songbirds. Usually, again, the Milo and the millet, more often than not, from my experience and from looking at other people's bird feeders, it ends up on the ground whole, where it's either going to sit there and rot or sprout the next season and just cause time. You're really, most of the time, that good, the better high quality bird seed is only 10-20% of the actual mix. So it might be cheaper, but you're better off per pound of the actual good seed is actually much more expensive. And same with the junk food, feeding junk food. These refined bakery products, it is made from grain, but it's got a lot of other processed materials in there, a lot of other sugars, not really the minerals and nutrition that the birds need. So you can use some of the old pastry, the old breads out there on occasion for the treats, but you don't want to make it a regular habit. It's just like us in candy or soda. It's really more supposed to be a sometimes food that we use on treats. So once in a while is fine, but not on a regular basis. And as far as winter feeding, talk to some new birders, and they're concerned that they don't want to start tracting and feeding, put the bird feeders out all winter long. They're afraid that those birds aren't going to move down south for the winter. They're leaving their feeders out all winter long. That's not really the case. Any of your birds that are migratory, they're not triggered by whether or not the food availability. They're going to be triggered to go down south and do the migratory pattern more based on the day length and how short the days are than it is the actual temperatures or food availability. So if you can get can definitely put those feeders out all summer long. Just like we've got birds here that migrate south for the winter. We're also a southern site for other bird species that are coming down from farther north and overwintering here, where there's more abundant food and more mild winter. So we'll see different species throughout the year. And so if you keep feeding year round, you can kind of get that different appearance throughout the year. So definitely you can leave those bird feeders up. Hummingbird feeders, leave them up until you stop seeing activity at them. Bird seed feeders, just kind of leave them up. You can leave them up year round. Again, just as Dr. Casey said, kind of an extreme example of both of them. Definitely want to make sure that you're using clean and dry seed. If it's wet enough to start growing here, you kind of see a little bit of fungal growth in there as well. If it's wet enough to start sprouting seed, it's wet enough to start rotting. And so you're going to get a lot of diseases in that, little mycotoxins and bacteria growing there. Similarly, if you get mouse on it, I wouldn't want to eat after a mouse. So they can carry diseases back and forth as well to birds and to people. So again, trying to keep those things separated out. Wildlife can definitely be a big issue. I know quite a few people that are avid birders and avid bird feeders, and they spend probably more money on trying to battle the wildlife than they do of actually feeding the birds. So again, on the right there with the raccoon, those bird feeders are entirely too close to the trunk. So ideally keeping it at least 10 feet away from the trunk or any vertical surface, any vertical poles. That way they can't climb up and reach over. Again, if you can keep it, about 10 feet from the top, that'll also help keep them down too. Again, I say that, but then again, squirrels and raccoons are smarter than they have any right to be at this point. They're pretty good at kind of getting around a lot of these things. So either looking at the different cones and different baffles to try to keep them from climbing up and over the string, down the ropes and the chains. If you're hanging it from someplace or up the poles, that'll help prevent them from getting there. Making sure that you're keeping it up off the ground. The higher the better. I'd say at least 5-6 feet up from the ground. If it's on a shepherd's hook, that'll help keep some of those wildlife feedings that have it. If it becomes one of those things, especially with the larger animals like raccoons or possums, if they're regularly coming there, having battles there, you'd always take the feeders down for several weeks. Likely those animals are going to stop seeing that as a regular spot to check for food, and they're going to move on. Also, all that dropped food on the ground, if the birds are messy and they're dropping them down, raking the bird seed off the ground on a regular basis is also going to help minimize other wildlife feeders feeding at that site. Bully bird, these bully birds can be a bit of a trouble too. Cowbirds and jays are often, they can be pretty aggressive and sit there on a bird feeder and keep all the other birds off. One of the ways you can kind of do this again is by either changing the bird seed type, providing different feeder shapes and sizes, so making the feeders a little small enough that the jays and the cowbirds can't get to it. The other option is also to provide them some different feeding sites a little farther away. So something like this platform feeder on the right, placing that farther away from your other bird feeder sites, placing things like peanuts that the jays really love, either shelled or whole peanuts that the jays can actually eat, separate away from your other bird feeders. That would kind of draw the blue jays and the cowbirds away from those places, those bird feeders, and less pressure for them to go towards the space that it's a little harder for them to get to. Also using different types of the feeders over that they can't get onto. We mentioned a little bit before, there's a Cooper's hawk on the left there, red-tailed hawk on the right. Kestrels are common in the area as well. All these animals can be predators of songbirds. That Cooper's hawk and the kestrel, that's their main diet, is going to be other birds. The red-tailed hawk is usually going for larger prey like rabbits and mammals on the ground, but if they get the opportunity, they're going to be going after pretty much anything they can get their claws on. So that'll be the birds too. Providing those overhead cover, that way they can get some place to get underneath and hide. The denser shrubby things, especially if you have some issues with kestrels you've seen, driving those off, providing some denser shrubbier plants in around it, blackberries or any of the kind of thorny things, that's going to give them some better protection, make it more difficult for the predatory birds to kind of swoop in and dive at them and get to it. So that's kind of how you can deal with that. You kind of got to do a balance here. You want to make sure that they have enough sight that the songbirds can see the predators coming, but enough cover that they can hide. So just making sure that there's some shrubs or evergreens nearby that they can kind of run to hide. Our number one predator is actually domestic cats. It's approximated that they eat 2.4 billion birds a year. It's kind of unbelievable at this, but sometimes these outdoor cats, they don't necessarily aren't hunting to eat. They're also sometimes just hunting for fun. So if anybody's had an outdoor cat, sometimes they'll bring rodents and other things and leave them on your doorstep. And this is where that can kind of become an issue. One of the ways to get around this is, again, just similar to the other thing, making sure that you're sweeping up the seed off the ground, making sure that you have enough cover for them to hide in, but you also want to make sure that their bird feeders are far enough away. So again, 10 feet away is a good point that the cats can't just jump straight out and start catching them as easily. You can also start, if you have some lower branched shrubs, limiting those up a little bit, or perennials, kind of thinning them out just a bit near the closer to the bird feeders. That way there's less places for those birds to hide. If you have a cat or your neighbors have cats and it's really becoming an issue that they're going after the birds, putting a bell on their collar, that will kind of alert those birds that they're out there hunting. That way you can kind of give them some leeway up from that way as well. Just a few things real quick on as far as this goes. Remember, you want to keep that steady supply of bird feed if you're really trying to attract the most number of birds there. Another big point to remember is that March is the most desperate months for these birds. By March, all those natural winter feedstocks have usually been depleted or are becoming depleted. And new plants really haven't started growing and setting seed or aren't producing fruit quite yet. And so they're not really available at that point. So March is typically your kind of leanest month for a lot of these birds. Some people will start wondering when if they should pack up the feeder. You can definitely pack up the feeder, put the feeder up year round, especially if it's not causing any issues. I know I usually will take mine down. I'm out a little bit more in the rural area. I tend to take mine down in February. That's mostly my management of skunks, of other wildlife. So skunks coming in for the bird feed and the other insects that would be going for that. I don't want to have to walk up my back door and have to come face to face with skunks. So I take it down for the month of March when they're out breeding, and then put it back up in March. Or I put it down in February and put it back up in March. If you're noticing a diminished presence of birds at the feeders, especially later in the spring, that might be an opportunity that you can start taking that down, or at least reduce the number of feeders at that point. That will kind of let you know, kind of take down some of your bird feed cost. The bird feeders, the hummingbird feeders, really the best time to be putting those up mid-April when those hummingbirds are coming back up, leaving those up till September, October, as long as you can and are seeing those activities going through there. And it's important not to overlook some of these natural food sources as well. When you're thinking about those natural food sources, this is where we start looking around a little farther to the space around us. You're kind of looking at your space around you. You want to think about how you can protect the spaces that birds are already using, how you can support those birds, and how their activities are doing, and maybe even how to improve that area that's being used. All of our individual yards are critical. Even a small space improved for these songbirds can really make a big difference. Even more so once you can start incorporating and encouraging neighbors, more people that can incorporate this native and wildlife gardening into their yards, a little bit, start adding up quite a bit and start creating those wildlife corridors through there. If again, prudent pruning or cutting down trees, so leaving those snags and stuff, leaving some dead wood if you can, sitting there, so that way it can provide that cover and those cavities for it. Definitely leave that leaf litter intact if you can. It's not only self-mulching for the tree, but also it's a good spot, especially in the spring. That's where a lot of little caterpillars and insects are going to be hiding in there, overwintering in those leaf litter that those birds can come in and feed on, and feed their young birds. In your own yard, avoid any excess or improper chemical use. Not only is that good for the birds, it's good for the environment in general, and it's probably better. It's a lot better for your pocketbook too. You obviously don't want to put in spend more money on chemicals than you need to, and if you're not putting them on the right way, you're not getting the use out of the chemicals. It's kind of, you're wasting that material and that time and effort, and hurting the environment as well. So really, you want to look at your responsible use of any kind of pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers out in the environment. Really putting those on only if it's necessary. This is where we usually turn to try to encourage people to use the IPM methods, really focus on preventing any kind of diseases, insect outbreaks, or herbicides first and foremost before you start looking straight to the pesticides. And then also making sure that you're putting your household waste in their proper locations, disposing of any toxic chemicals where they need. If you have any problems or have any questions about how to dispose of any materials in that house, definitely reach out to your department, your local department of solid waste. They can tell you the best way locally to get rid of those, dispose of those. And definitely, if you can, plant your native North American natives. These are species that are evolved with our native songbirds as well. So they already provide that food and shelter that these birds really need for their proper nutrition. When you're looking at this, these are typically bird magnets. So these are providing all the things that they need: seeds, nuts, nectars. Not only are they providing the seed, nuts, and nectars, the native plants a lot of times will also host more native insects as well, which is that important food that the birds need to, they're collecting these insects. Even the seed and fruit loving birds are collecting insects to take back and feed their young. You know, nuts, berries, and nectar don't provide a lot of protein that these young birds need. So that's where they're going for those insects a lot. Again, provide a lot of shelter, and they're providing that proper cover and space from predators. Native trees and plants, I really think that if you're looking to try to get the most benefit of attracting birds as possible, the quickest way to do that is to get some of these smaller native trees and shrubs. With the least amount of plantings, plants available, you can support more animals that way. They come in different shapes and sizes for different suns and shade, and you can get quite a diverse plant selection off of those. Also, for the pocketbook, native trees and shrubs are going to give you the best on it, because you might spend more money up on front, but they're going to be longer lived than most of your perennial plants are going to be. Definitely stay away from or remove any of the invasive species you have on your property. These are pretty much junk food at this point for the birds. Honeysuckles and autumn olives, they have plenty of sugars and plenty of energy, but they don't have all the vitamins and minerals that they really need. So it's like trying to run a whole full marathon on nothing but Mountain Dew or anything like that. You've got a lot of sugar, but you're not going to get all the other nutrition that you need to keep going long term. So making the switch to natives and get these different different plant specific species, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. So really looking at what your plant, first I would start looking at some of the plants that are interesting to you. What do they need? Soil, water, light, how big they are. Definitely start looking at some of those different plants that will attract the songbirds. I've got a little bit of a list there, and I can share a more inclusive list here at the end. And then also start looking at some of these other things. If you're incorporating into an already designed space or already landscape, looking at what other benefits that these native plants can provide to your environment too. So, do they have any fall shade, seasonal color, whether it's flowers or leaves? Can they provide some shade of your overall, your areas that you want to hang out outside? It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. It can be something that as your landscaping has a hole, or you can kind of fill those back in with either some of these native plants. You can add it into larger containers nearby the house. Any plants that you're not really satisfied with, you're bored with, or whatever, give the boring plants to a new gardener, and you can bring in some of the newer, cooler, invasive plants, or not invasive. Sorry, I read the wrong word. You can bring in some of these newer, cooler native plants. If you have invasive species, that's where the ones that you want to specifically be going out of your way to get rid of. Don't just get rid of, if you've got a large area, don't just get rid of, wipe out the invasive species. You really want to remove the invasive species and replace it with proper native plants. Otherwise, you've just opened up a new area of disturbance and new seed bank, and those invasives are going to move right back in. Even if you can just dedicate a small section of your yard just to natives, you can do that as well. You can start playing around with just putting a small native garden in, if you don't like the look of mixing them together. If you can, organize them in some small masses or clusters. I like this as a general design principle anyhow. Instead of one individual single plant, doing small masses or swaths or kind of a flow through the garden provides some better visual impact, and also makes it easier for these the birds and the native insects to find and use those resources. Just quick rundown of some different plants for the birds. If you have the space for it, you can definitely plant oak. Mature oaks are going to support several hundreds, possibly thousands, if I can remember right, of different insects, caterpillars, and whatnot. That's going to provide a lot of material for a lot of food source to feed those young baby birds. So providing that oak that one single oak tree can support a lot of different life outside of just what you would normally think. Hawthorns, crab apples, paper birch, hemlock, and serviceberries. These are good ones to kind of think about from a winter standpoint. I kind of focused here just because these are producing their fruit and the seed later in the season, or they're ripening up later in the season. So that way they're typically going to be feeding the birds through the fall and into the winter. And so that's kind of some of those there. Again, similar thought process with these plants. Inkberry and winterberry hollies. Those berries will sit there and hold red for a good long period on those plants, but they don't usually turn ripe until later in the winter. So they'll look pretty and have that pretty winter interest for a long period of time. And then once they do finally ripen up in the winter, that gives those birds kind of that late season snack. Viburnums and chokeberries. Some species of viburnum will produce their fruit different times of the year. Some of them can even do it in later season. Chokeberry are another good one that does later fall fruiting on that. And junipers. That includes the eastern red cedar. I know a lot of people don't necessarily like the look of them just because they grow up in fence rows, kind of almost seen as a weed in pastures and everything. But they provide a lot of natural native cover for winter sheltering locations, nesting locations, and those berries, again, don't ripen up until winter. So things like cedar waxwings love those berries and will strip those out pretty quickly. For your herbaceous plants, either the non-woody plants, pretty much all those native grasses are going to provide seed that those little songbirds are going to be going for. All your asters, your coneflowers, all these your standard kind of prairie plants are going to be putting off seed sources that are going to be able to provide things like chickadees and finches food throughout the year. And again, these things, luckily for us, that these birds are not the cleanest eaters. So they also, if you have a kind of area that you're trying to naturalize, they're going to help kind of spread some of those seeds out everywhere as well. For hummingbirds, a little bit different just because they're normally eating more of a liquid diet, that nectar. Again, native plants are gonna be preferred, just because they're gonna provide a little bit different. Mostly the nectar is gonna be sugar, but there are trace minerals and nutrients in there that they need, that those native plants are gonna provide specifically. Definitely start off with those native plants. You can use annuals, different types of annuals to kind of help fill in when those native perennials might be blooming. Really important if you're trying to draw those hummingbirds in and you're just starting that kind of hummingbird gardening thing. You can start getting your natives, what natives you can find, and kind of try your hand at that point. Those perennials can kind of get expensive pretty quick. So bring in a few at a time, and you can kind of fill in with the annuals, non-native annuals, to kind of fill in that food source. Looking for your bright red flowers, especially the ones that are kind of a deeper throat. They prefer those just because they know that there's more likely to have nectar in it. They're the only ones with the beaks and tongues long enough to get all the way back to there. Bees can't get back there, at least can't go directly through there. There are some carpenter bees that will go to the back side of it and rob it out from it, but for the most part, it's strictly for the hummingbirds. Got some different examples of different red flowers, red and pink flowers that off to the side there that really will draw those plants in. These are just some different resources available for you that you can use. I'll leave that out there. And I think I'm going to also, on the chat, I had another option. That first one there, that Missouri Botanical Garden has that bird gardening resource, is a good resource that I found, and has a really good list of plants and what they provide as well. I'll go ahead and drop that in the chat box, but if you search Missouri Botanical for bird gardening, that will come up as well. So here it is in the chat box for all those that are available right now. If anybody needs this, like I said, it's got a lovely list. It's not the prettiest of publications. There's no pictures, but it is very detailed, 8 pages, including different annuals, perennials, shrubs and vines and trees, what they provide and what season they're providing this at. I thought I always find those kind of lists very valuable when I'm looking to include new lists into it. Not the greatest of content for people, talking, but it is at least good for kind of reference to go back to those for actually, when you start actually getting into the nitty gritty of all that. So anybody have any questions?
Any questions for Adam? Feel free to unmute yourself. If you just click the little mute button, you can unmute yourself and ask them like that, or type them into the chat box. While we're waiting for any possible questions, thanks so much, Adam, for the presentation tonight. That was really great information and great plant lists and all kinds of helpful information to feed our birds.